I've always seen life as a series of stories. Everyone has a story, everything has a history, and every story has its own set of emotions, each of which can be expressed in a million different ways. Every day has small incidents, and those incidents have their own little stories, and these have been passed on for generations. For the ones who wanted to tell their story, there has been art. Through music, through pictures and videos, through writing, through clothes, through architecture, and even the things that we build our lives with, the small things in our rooms, everything just says a little bit about us. And film encompassed all of that. It became a way to say all of this in a way that's closest to reality. I got obsessed with the idea that I could make someone see a thought in my head as a reality. Writing it down wasn't enough, and even though it felt gratifying to put it down on paper, it felt like I needed to see it. I knew I'd been bit by the cinebug. There's no other feeling like being on set, like writing scenes over and over till it feels like it's getting real. To sit with all of that footage and put it together like a jigsaw puzzle. Except in this puzzle, I can throw away a few pieces if I like. This process feels liberating. Creativity is liberation, and for me, being creative is the only way I know to be, the only thing I truly have. And for as long as I've got it, I think you'll find me making films.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Closet Writer Chronicles. I'm your host Sangeeta, aka the Moody Marshmallow. You just heard our guest for today, Sana Mariam. Sana is a writer and aspiring director. She did her BA in film from LaSalle, Singapore, and went on to work with Madras Talkies. She has worked on films like Chekka Chavantavanam and the Ponniyin Selvan movies. She has also worked on short films like Bloom and a short film on Raghu and Nalini. Tune in to hear about her journey in film, writing, and more. Hey everyone, welcome to the Closet Writer Chronicles. This week I have with me Sana Mariam. Hi Sana, it's so good to have you on the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So, the first thing I want to ask you is what is your earliest memory of being creative and when did you start writing?
My earliest memory, I suppose, the thing is, I definitely can't pin it down to anything specific because I think I came from a very creative background. Both my parents were extremely creative people and they worked in film, but they worked in different departments. My father was a cinematographer, my mother was a costume designer. They both like to write and direct and things like that. So from a very early stage, I was already kind of seeing creative nuances in everything, because even painting a door in my house was like an event, because
Oh, okay.
we would get, this has happened physically. My father painted a door because he wanted it a specific way. So all of these are the kind of memories, and I was also encouraged to do a lot of creative things as a child. As like, I was put in a dance class, singing classes. I learned how to play the piano and the guitar and everything from my young age. And even I would read a lot. Like, my mom would read to me a lot, and then so because of that, I would read a lot as well. And so I kind of can't exactly tell which was a starting point, because it was kind of like second nature to always be in a creative space. But definitely I feel like when I started writing was probably when I was a teenager, somewhere when I was uh 12, 13, I suppose, is when I felt like I started uh actually understanding prose poetry and seeing how to put myself into it. And a lot of, like, poetry would tend to be more about um talking about a metaphysical state of the mind type of thing. I mean, as a teenager, probably I didn't think I was that advanced, but I just mean that it was more to do with myself. Whereas, where if I would write prose, it would be fictional, and I understood that I like to um, write fictionally, but then also I very quickly understood the only reason I was writing is because I wanted to see it visually, and not necessarily because I think writing is my strong suit massively. I think there are so many amazing writers, and I would be like, it's great to take someone's writing as well and do something with it. But I was writing just because I needed to somehow visualize what I was thinking.
Oh, that's really cool. So, do you like, what do you like vaguely remember as the first thing you sort of wrote? Was it like a poem? Was it like a story?
Um, I know that when I was much younger, this is rather embarrassing, if anything. When I was probably like 8 or 9 or something, because we would listen to music so much in the car, I would just keep telling my friend that we need to make music. So we would, I
That's
would keep,
not embarrassing.
yeah, we would just keep, no, but we would write very silly lyrics. Yeah, like I would write them and then we'll start like giving some tune to it. And that was definitely the start, I would say, where I was like, okay, you can rhyme it and try to say a story in terms of lyrics. Like I was coming to that. But that was when I was much younger. I think though when I was about 13 or 14, where I was reading like the books that I was reading were making an impact on me, and they're not like, I think at that point I just also wanted to be able to write similarly. Like I wanted to exercise that about myself. So I started writing fiction in terms of novels, and I would keep writing chapters, and the like and the stories would be influenced by things that I'm reading for sure. So it would keep shifting, and I honestly never finished a full book, but I would do that where I was actually writing more in chapter sense, like in a more novel sense for sure. And then later on, when I was realizing that it was film, I had to figure out how to structure it in a script. But then I went to film school, so they taught me how to do that. But yeah, but my earliest memory of writing scenes that way was more in this sense.
Okay. But that's no, that's really interesting to kind of hear, because usually when I ask this question to a lot of people, it's like different things. Because I remember earlier in this season, there was someone, I if I remember correctly, it was Shumanto Chattopadhyay,
Huh.
who is the chairman at Ogilvy, and he runs the English Nut, and he was talking about how his first memory was actually making drawings on the floor while being creative, and every day like the cleaning lady would come and rub it off, so every day he'd have like a new canvas to work on. So that was something. Yeah, and then he'd again, like in school, he would like write stuff, and so again, so it's really interesting to just hear, different people's takes
For sure.
on this question. So yeah, but having said that, since you said you were influenced by a lot of the stuff you were reading, and since you do come from a family that really encouraged creativity, right? Like your surroundings were pretty much, it was kind of second nature to you. So then, who are some of, say, the writers or artists that have really influenced you, impacted you, or who have just really like stayed with you, or even just like pieces of work in terms of like, film or books or TV shows, music, whatever.
Uh, this is honestly the toughest question you can give any artist. I'm sure you know. It's like, we get so like, oh God, how to pick. But as for my teenage years, I honestly don't know how to nitpick. Also because I'm sometimes terrible with titles. But around that point, I was actually genuinely reading a lot of classic literary pieces, like a lot of Virginia Woolf and actually a lot of Shakespeare.
Okay,
And
wow.
I was one of the, like, very typically loving Wuthering Heights and all of that, just because I felt that was the best way to establish how they told stories, because
Hmm.
their sense of a narration was amazing, and pretty much what set stone for what we've done so far. Like, so that was helping me a lot at that point, and I also felt it was helping me improve my English in terms of writing. Whereas, I mean, I did a lot of young fiction reading, but I think also Khalid Hosseini, I remember, was something I
Hmm.
obsessed over. I obsessed over his books so much. A Thousand Splendid Suns, I got very attached to and read it
Yeah.
cover to cover a lot of times. That was all definitely very impactful for me, because I think it taught me how to set something in a chaotic time, but be very rooted in the culture of the place, to create something more relatable, even if I'm not from it. But because
Right.
you have context of these things, is why you are more emotionally moved by it. I only started understanding that from him, because it was something that I obviously were not going through. But why was I so moved by it? That question came up for
Hmm.
me then. And I think in terms of artists, sometime around college, I got very fascinated by Wong Kar-wai's work.
Okay.
He's a filmmaker from Hong Kong, and I it was actually, we would have these screenings in college every other morning for like films, and it's like 9 a.m. in the morning in this really cold room, and it's quite difficult not to sleep just because you're just feeling really cozy, and sometimes it's black and white movies and things like that. How much ever you're into film, sometimes you just feel sleepy. So I used to come there and think, I'm going to pass out. And this morning, they started this movie called Chunking Express. And
Okay.
I didn't know what the movie was going to be about or anything. And my lecturer puts it on, and I just couldn't sleep. I was so amazed by what I was watching. Just the first sequence, the way it starts, the way there is a narration with music, and the visual has this kind of stop motion effect. He's done it in
Oh,
like slow motion, kind of, basically high
interesting.
speed rather. And the way it was shot and everything, in that first just 2 minutes of that narration, I was into the movie, and then I just couldn't get myself out. And it was such a simple script. When you look at it, it's just very character based and stuff. And but how he manages to accentuate his story and kind of eccentric characters using every single aspect of film, it was very gripping. So I definitely got influenced by him. And then by that narrative, there are a lot of other filmmakers, because I like the character driven stories a lot. Like there are
Mhm.
Richard Linklater's films, which are like the Before Sunrise trilogy, which is like very simplistic in a sense. It's just conversational. It's like a
Conversational. It's yeah, it's very conversational.
the entire three movies are just a podcast between these two people.
Yeah, basically.
Really, it actually is. And but it's amazing how it manages to be engaging, and how it still manages to form a character arc for these two. Or it's
Yeah.
like relationship is a character, and that's evolving between three films. So it was beautiful to watch something like that. I think another filmmaker like that is Noah Baumbach, who
Yeah.
did Marriage Story, but his
Mad
other
story. Love it.
as
Yeah.
well, Squid and the Whale, and Francis Ha, all of these.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a big coming of age film person, as in I'll
Okay.
watch them, but they don't necessarily affect me as much. But I felt like Francis Ha was like a revelation. It was amazing. I was stunned. And but I'm also very I think I like a lot of different kind of things, whether it comes to music or films or everything. I like a mishmash of everything. So visually, probably like a Wong Kar-wai, like I said, or a Denis Villeneuve, the director of Dune and all of that.
Mm.
He has an amazing visual sense. Terrence Malick, he's done oh god, the movie's names are slipping by me, but Song to Song, a lot of films, like their visual styles really get me. Whereas like a written narrative of a Richard Linklater or a Noah Baumbach, or even Scorsese and Woody Allen,
Yeah.
like for more class
Yeah.
names in that sense, like they had solid scripts. It's not just it's not just what they put out visually that matters. They have a very clear narrative in their head, to the point of how they edit it. So like that, like, so I'm influenced by a lot. I don't think I'm a very niche kind of audience or a filmmaker. Even if someone were to ask me what kind of films do you want to make, I don't know how to say it, because I feel like they're just stories that I'm like, I would want to say that story, like I would want to tell that story. And then if that means it's more action driven, then yeah, that's what it demands. Or if it's more character driven, and then yeah, that's what it needs. So I'm kind of
Yeah.
like
No,
free.
but that's amazing. And again, because again, the reason I asked this is because it's there are always like these certain stories or like artistic pieces in whichever form that kind of while growing up do sort of stick with you or impact you, and they just kind of stay with you. I know for me, and I keep saying this on the podcast, like one of the stories for me that really stuck with me was Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I loved, and of course, Greta Gerwig's, I think, adaptation of it was amazing, honestly speaking. So, like, there are those few certain stories that do kind of just stay with you and you just keep going back to them. So it's always like fascinating to know like what sort of shapes or helps shape someone's sort of creative take on something.
For sure.
So it was really cool to kind of hear, what sort of influenced you, and some really cool recommendations, which I will definitely check out for sure. But yeah, so then when did you sort of realize that you wanted to kind of pursue filmmaking as a career, and possibly then, in turn, obviously writing is a part of it, but kind of do it in a professional sense?
Huh, okay. I have two answers for this, which may not make sense, but it will. My first answer is I honestly think it's from what I said before, that when I was writing around when I was a teenager, and it didn't feel like that was enough.
Okay.
Like just putting it down on paper didn't feel enough. It started feeling like, no, but I need to visually see it. Or I would have this a lot where if I'm listening to a song in the car, I will picture what it should look like,
Okay.
that what do these people need to be doing in this song, like how would you want to shoot it. And that's a lot to do with our Indian culture of having songs in films. I still am not very tempted to do music videos. I feel like that's a completely different art, because it can be a lot more abstract and things like that. But it would be more that you take a song, and if you're putting it into a story narrative, how would you want to shoot it as, whether it's with a dance or with a like a montage, all of those kind of things. But I realized when I was listening to music, I was seeing how to shoot it. When I'm writing, I'm seeing how to shoot it. That thought was in my head. And I'm sure it's because I was seeing shootings as a kid. I've been on sets because of my parents and, all of that. But I guess this part was the most exciting for me to see that, you can take it and then create it. And you want to
Hmm.
tell someone that, listen, this is how we should do it. So that was the most specific thing. I also realized that I don't want to be holding the camera, nor
Okay.
do I want to be making the costumes. But I know what the camera should do. I know what the costumes should look like. But I don't want to do those specific things. So that's how you come to understand that, okay, then probably what you want to do is direct. You want to do all of it, but these are not your traits. I'm not skilled. The actual manual skill, I don't possess. I need people. And then you have to understand, are you going to be able to actually communicate all this to these people, because that's the main part of directing, really, is to put whatever vision you're working towards into other people, and at least hopefully get them excited about it, so that they
Yeah.
want to do it with you as well. But that's when I understood that I wanted to be a filmmaker in this sense specifically. uh, I think there's a lot of assumption that it was just like, oh, her family's done it, so she'll want to do it. But they never really pushed me towards that at all. In fact, they were very on, you should do music, because I said I was learning to play instruments at that point, and they were very like, and they were like, she dances very well, she should dance. And I was like, I enjoy doing those things, but this was the thing that was most gnawing at me. Like, it felt like I had to start doing that now. And the other answer to this question is, apparently, a certain actor asked me when I was a kid, when I was on set or something like that, saying, "Oh, do you want to grow up and become an actor?" And I was like, "No, who would do that? Because like actors are like told to do what to do. I'll be a director, so I can tell people what to do."
What? Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is what my mom told me that apparently I've done when I was a kid. I have no recollection of this. So it's like maybe there's a control freak angle to this from when I was a kid, and that's what this actually is.
Like, I want to control the entire narrative of what's going on.
Yeah, like me, I will tell you what to do. I mean, some level, I guess directors are like that. No way. At the end of it, because it stays with us, the final say is with the directors, and you have to be able to respect that.
But then, how did you? So then you were clear that, okay, this is something you were really interested in, and obviously, since you've also seen like a close working of it, even in terms of the work your parents have been doing, then how do you take the call of, okay, I know for a fact that I want to study filmmaking before actually getting out into the field and working? And the reason I'm asking this is because you do hear of so many there is that whole thing of like, do you really need to study, writing or filmmaking before actually going? And there are many different views and perspectives to this.
For
So
sure.
I'm just curious to know what your perspective is and why you took that decision for yourself to actually study filmmaking.
Right. To be honest, because at about like 9 standard or 10 standard, I was like, okay, this is it. I'm going to make films. And I, in fact, stopped caring about my boards also, which deeply upset my mother. And but I started telling her that, look, I really want to apply to a film college, because I understood that I have to get a degree. I can't just go, and I can't be someone who doesn't have a degree. I wanted that college experience. I wanted to put myself out there in the world. And I think as a kid, I just thought it would be cool to go abroad, study film. It sounded like a grand idea in my head, and it felt like I could start doing this thing that I wanted immediately. But at that point, actually, my mom told me that you shouldn't even bother. Go start working. If you really want to do film, don't go to college. Let's find, like, go start talking to directors and stuff and start getting on to work. And I was like, no, 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 I still want to go to college. All my friends are going to college. I want to hold a degree. I don't want to look like I'm uneducated. So it was like, it was more to do with that, honestly. I didn't even, and I was like, no, I need to learn before I go on. I said, what'll I even know? I look stupid if I go without studying anything. Like, I've only gone as a kid, and that means nothing. That just means you're hanging around and everyone is just looking at you as a child, really.
Yeah.
What have I actually taken in? So that's why I wanted to go to film school. I just wanted to feel, I think, a little more validated before I
Okay.
went on to work. And but once I got to, but I was willing to obviously commit to it entirely. I wanted to use everything that they give to further my skill. And the great thing about film school, so again, I know there's a lot of debate about whether film school is required or not. I think maybe it's person to person. I
Yeah.
I don't know that I would like I would recommend it to anyone. I would say, it's a great way to understand every single aspect of filmmaking, especially if you want to direct. It gives you that skill. Like, I was able to walk out of my degree knowing that if I have to edit, I can do it. If I have to sound, I can do it. Like, I have basic knowledge to
Yeah.
enter a room, talk to one of the technicians, and know what I'm talking about. So
Right.
that gave me a confidence. And also, I didn't realize how much I'm taking in until I actually got to practice it, which film school does a lot. It makes you do projects in each sense. So you start knitting all those pieces together and realizing the value of each, um, I don't know, of each department, I suppose.
Right.
Because I do think there are a lot of films out there that think that just dialogue and the actors is everything in the film, whereas it's a visual medium.
Hmm.
Everything that you're putting in a frame is deliberate, and
Yeah.
it has to have meaning. And you understand the importance of that more and more when you're surrounded by people who are telling you that. And are a directing lecturer telling me that mise en scène is everything, and like that's the other way that I have to express myself rather than just dialogue. So you're actually freeing yourself up more. You're not trying to say everything vocally. That. So all of that learning came for me. Like, it also taught me how to look at films in a deeper
Yeah.
sense. I got a better understanding of world films. Like, world cinema opened up to me because I was studying the French Revolution and avant-garde films, and everything. And like, it also definitely takes away the stigma of watching world cinema. Like,
Yeah.
otherwise you're watching subtitle films or whatever. Now I think that's disappeared even more because of OTT. But at that point, like, back in the day, we were still feeling like that. And once you're in college, I'm already in Singapore, which is where I studied. So it's like everything I'm watching there for them is already foreign language.
Yeah. True.
My films are foreign language films, like Hindi films, Tamil films, everything like that. So, so I actually felt like I had so much learning to the point that when I actually came and started working, I didn't have to start as low as I would have without all that knowledge. I knew terms, I knew what the process is to a certain level. I knew how to read a script and judge it, like to be
Right.
able to give
Okay.
some feedback at least, and or not be confused by it. So it felt like, okay, now I can get into the thick of it, which is exactly what happened.
Which is great. I mean, obviously that is what worked for you, right? So, and you were like, okay, let me actually go study so I have some base knowledge I can work on and build on once I am actually on the field, which is great. And it's like you said, it's, I think, a very person to person thing on if they want to study or directly get on the field and start working and learn through that. It's a very personal choice. But then kind of like progressing, like you came back and you joined Madras Talkies and you've been there for like 5 years now. What has that journey been like how did that happen, and just generally how do you think it's helped you as a creative?
It's helped me in every way, shape or form. I came back and I was actually very clear throughout college also that I'll go work in Bombay and work in the Hindi film industry, because I think somewhere when I was a teenager, I kind of there was a separation between me and Tamil films. Whereas I grew up watching Tamil films, and honestly, most of what I watched and enjoyed was Mani Ratnam's films. Like, that's just the way it was. I mean, I'm sure that's the way it was for everyone. But like, so there was a gap probably in my teenage years, even till about college, where I wasn't. really watching Tamil films that much. And
Mm.
I just wasn't relating to it and things like that. So at that point, I just felt like, okay, I need to go to Hindi. So I actually never even considered working in Chennai, or and I didn't even think working with Mani sir was a possibility. Working at Madras Talkies didn't seem like an option. I just never
Yeah.
thought of it. But it was my mom who was like, you'd be a fool if you didn't try, because he's the master, and if there's anyone you should be learning from, it's him in the whole country. And I was like, yeah, I know, but I just, like I said, I just didn't think it was an option. But because she pushed me, and now I had some kind of portfolio, because I had 3 years worth
Yeah.
of, I mean, they're nothing. He should not be allowed. He should not watch them. But I had like I had a thesis film that I had done, which was about a 15-minute short, which I was probably most proud of, which was probably had the most technical, I don't know, prowess of that I was able to show at that point. And now I'll look back and be like, God, what was I thinking? And all. But it was still in a shape where I was like, okay, this should give you some idea that I have something to offer. And that's what I sent across with like a resume saying I have some technical like skills as well. I can edit if need be and this that, and that I want a AD. And I sent it through, and I was trying to follow up and everything. And then one day I managed to get an interview, and then I got the job. And it was just like, really, it felt overwhelming till the point that I actually started. And
Mm.
from there on out, it just became comfortable in the sense that they give you the space to be part of the team. The
Mm.
more
Okay.
work you're willing to take up, the more they're willing to give you. And at that point I was very like, yeah, I'll do whatever, like whatever you give me. And so the first film that I worked on was Chekka Chivandavanam, which came
Mm.
out in 2018, and I was
Okay.
working on it in 2017 from the pre-production portion where we were scripting and getting everything ready for shoot, then we shot, and then post-production entirely as well. So that gave me, like, it was so quick. I almost feel like it was like a dream. It went by so quickly, but it was super strenuous in terms of le- needing to be right smack in the middle of it. Because if at that point someone is looking at you and saying, you're capable of doing this much, you're like, yeah, 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 I can. And you just want to like actually get into all of that. And that's what Madras Rockies has definitely been. That, if you can handle it, then you should do it.
Mm.
That mindsets helped me, I think, also um, get ahead quicker. That
Mm.
within 5 years I feel like I've achieved more than if I was working with 10 directors,
Yeah.
because you're already learning from the master. And he knows, he's just so like clued in. He can tell from a mile away if I'm even spacing out for a second, and he will snap me back. So there's no time to like, like drop the ball. You have to be on it. And that's pushed me to, I think, learn as quickly as I can and start grasping as much as you can, so that you're not spending too much time actually assisting. That now the thing is, I have to get out and make films, like, that comes in quickly when you're working at Madras Rockies, I think. And you definitely feel like now you can't go work with someone else. Like, we want to collaborate with everyone in the world for sure,
Wow.
but we're like, Mani sir is guru now. How can we ever, learn from anyone else? It kind of feels like that. But it's been an amazing journey. And I think the other amazing thing about Madras Talkies is that because he is a director and a producer that's running a production house,
Yeah.
you are going to learn both aspects of it.
Mm.
So, as a, even if I work in the direction department, but I don't think there's a massive distinction where he's going to be like, oh, that's a production issue, that's their issue. No, like,
Right.
we're encouraged to look at it as, no, but you want to be a director, you have to be completely aware of a production and how it runs, and what does that mean for you and your writing. You have to be able to adapt. And so I've become more aware of how just how conscious I need to be about what the production is doing, and like how to help the production, and vice versa. So, I feel like that I'm respectful of that, because I've learned from a director producer, and again, one of the best, right? So it
Yeah.
so that's been amazing. And of course, everyone at Madras Rockies is also awesome. So that,
No, but that's really cool that you're also kind of encouraged to look at the different aspects of filmmaking, not just in a creative sense and obviously creating a film, but also in terms of production, what goes in logistically.
Yeah, yeah,
and also just the fact of, I would assume, even like marketing and a sort of a business side of things, of how it will, affect a film, or what a film can do, say, in a market sense or business sense, which I think is really cool, and is again something a lot of people don't really consider when they think of creative fields in general, because it's just like, oh, you just write stuff, make stuff, and that's it.
yeah.
Because I work in a publishing house, and I work in the rights and business development side of it, so people don't even think, the automatic assumption is, oh, you work in editorial, and I'm like, no, I actually work on the business side of things. So it's really cool to
Very
kind of
important functional clog in the machine.
exactly. So
Yeah.
it's really nice to hear people talk about that and say, hey, there is like another side to this also, because obviously your art also needs to make money at some point.
And if you want to put it out, this is the thing you have to be aware of. If you're going to think that you're going to come here without any business sense, or at least try to cultivate it while you're here, it's just not going to work. Like, we have to be practical about things by the end
Oh
of it,
yeah.
right? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very important.
Yeah,
And also,
100%.
I think if you're only thinking creatively all the livelong day, you're going to become self-indulgent really quick, because you're just thinking about what you want to do and things like that. You're not thinking about all the people that are working on it and what is viable. While still, you have to be able to bridge the two, is definitely. And I think we need to be aware of that even as a generation.
Oh yeah,
Waste
100%.
not.
Yeah, for sure. No, so it's really nice to hear people, come and actually talk about that side, because it is a bit of an, I think it's much needed for people to just hear about it and understand that there's more to it than just, you're not just, it's not all butterflies and roses and whatever.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing I get most often, because, like, again, I'm doing something creative. So they'll be like, oh my God, how is it? And, it must be amazing. And I'm like, yeah, it's awesome, no doubt. But, like, it's hectic. I have no sleep. And, it's a lot, though. And they're like, but you're having fun, right? And I'm like, that only balances out so much, guys. And it's not like I wake up every day, go to work, like, yay, so fun.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain that, because on my most stressful days, and you're like, but this is what you love, right? This is what's fun, right? I'm like, I'm not being ungrateful for what I'm doing. It's a job. And it's not like we just sit and talk about the story and think, amazing, now let's go and put the camera. There's so much, and especially as an AD, that's the work. Like right now, I'm not directing, I'm an AD right now. So my work is entirely logistical.
Yeah.
It's to ensure all the things are there, and like even in post production, it's to ensure that everything is happening on a timeline. We're working against crazy timelines with the budgets of so much, like there's just so much money involved. There's so many time constraints
Yeah.
and deadlines, that it doesn't really feel like, oh wow, we're doing something super creative all the time. It feels entirely different, which I guess you don't necessarily realize.
Yeah, because of course there are days you want to whine and be like, "Oh my god, there's too much. I cannot just leave me alone." But of course,
Yeah, oh God. Like,
it's
and
part and parcel.
for sure. And like, especially, I think, sometimes I'm just envious of people who work in corporates and stuff, because I was like, you guys have so much structure in your lives.
Yeah, yeah,
I,
that's
I
true.
did not realize I was giving up when I was coming into this. I just, I was aware that, of course, you work all kinds of hours. Shoot means you leave, at
Yeah.
like 3 in the morning. It's very normal. I've known this my whole life, but that's what I thought life was. I didn't realize other people are waking up and going only at 10 to work and things like that.
Oh
I
my
had
god.
no clue. And then now I'm like, you guys work only till 5 o'clock? That's insane. And I was like, you get Saturday and Sunday off? That's
Oh my god.
yeah.
You've opened a whole can of worms for the creative community at this point.
Yeah, like I think that's something that you guys don't like. People don't notice for sure. These are definitely like some, yeah, things that kind of go brushed aside.
Yeah, yeah. What is the craziest like assumption you've had about like your career though? Like, what's the craziest thing someone said to you?
They asked me what my caravan is like in shoot, and I was like, "Are you nuts? You think I have a caravan at shoot?
As an AD, yes, ADs get their own caravans.
I have a caravan? That's insane. What are you talking about?" And it just kind of made me realize that people think my job is really glamorous. And I was like, you understand that I don't sleep. And like sometimes it's like difficult to bathe when we're working so around the clock, and I'm working with carpenters and doing like when I come back, I literally look like one of those kids who've been playing at in a playground the whole day because I'm dirty. I'm like, I'm literally filthy. So what they're thinking is such a different perspective of it. And I guess there's a lot of the, so what are these actors like, and what is
Oh
all
my
of that.
God.
And I'm like, dude, I don't even know. Like, I wasn't even thinking about all that at the point. At that point, you're just kind of like, hi, can you come stand here? Okay, cool. Thank you. Now they will tell you what to do, and you just have to listen to sir, and I'm out. Okay. Like,
Oh my
so
God.
we're worried about all sorts of different things. You're like, where did that person's costume go? And all sorts of, yeah. So, they definitely think there's a lot of glamour to it. I'm sure, I mean, I guess it's there, especially because, you know, there's celebrities, I guess that's the,
Yeah.
right. But when we on set are not seeing it that way, because we're like actors doing a job, and of course we treat them well and everything like that, and actors definitely do have all that, but at the end of it they are also doing a job. And I work with
Yeah.
someone who is like very professional, so they are coming and they are also expected to be very professional. So
Yeah.
I'm lucky that way to be in an environment where all of us have to just kind of
Yeah.
concentrate on work.
Yeah. Because it is a job by the end of the day. You have to
Oh, yeah.
like be
Yeah,
professional.
100%. And we have fun, no doubt. Shoots
Yeah.
can also be a
Yeah.
wrap. Like, you have a lot of fun doing all of that. You're with so many people, you kind of feel like you're in a boot camp, you know,
Yeah.
kind of like that. But it's a fun camp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but that's crazy that someone asked you that if you have a caravan.
This was not even a person I knew well. It was just someone who met me for the first time somewhere and asked me.
Wow. That is so crazy. Oh my God. But yeah, okay. So then coming back to working at Madras Talkies, something else actually I'm curious about, since obviously this is kind of like the first job you've taken up, right?
Hmm.
In terms of being an AD and sort of working with this production house. And obviously I would imagine working with a production house like this, and of course someone like Maniratnam who has already such a defined cinematic language, so to speak, and style of filmmaking. Do you think it's, of course, I mean, it's amazing to work, but do you think that it somewhere also affects your voice as a writer and creative, in the sense that do you some, and the reason I ask this is because it's a conversation I have with a lot of writers and stuff in general, like how much do you feel sometimes that you're actually subconsciously imitating the inspiration you're taking from, right, and things you're and emulating, and then where do you then decide like, okay, how do I actually develop my own voice, because it might be great to emulate a person, but how do I
Right.
find my voice from here? So how has that been for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Manisa has such a distinct voice, and he has such an amazing visual sense, which speaks in every film.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, of course I'm such a fan. Like, you're an AD or everything, but all of us are just fans. And but I also feel, especially when it comes to him, that he does it that way and it works. Every time someone tries to imitate him, it doesn't work for them. I've seen it
Mm,
so many times over, and it's not like what they're doing is bad. It's still beautiful, and they would have written it well and everything, but the way that he structures dialogue, the way that he takes certain shots and things like that, it works for him when he does it. And so in fact you start reminding yourself that, listen, if you think you're going to go do it exactly how he's doing it, it's not going to work, because it's not going to, yeah, they're gone, everyone's going to be able to tell that it's not coming from you. So
mm,
I think we all concentrate on just imbibing more of the passion, that learn, not of course we're trying to technically pick up the things that he's doing, but also the thought behind it is what is the most inspiring. That if he's writing a scene and then he's rewriting it, then we're like, look, he's not giving up, he's pushing it, so you take that in. Or if he's shooting a scene and he's not shooting it in the most conventional way, he's always thinking about how to shoot it even better, or like more differently rather, then we're like, okay, look, you can't just think that you're going to go keep the camera here, get an over the shoulder, and just do all coverage and come back home and be like, I shot a scene. You have to see how to do something to push the boundary and then get something. That's when you're going to get something magical out of it. And so I think it's just that at no point am I like, I'm looking at everything he's doing, and I'm obviously amazed by it every day, but I don't think that I want to go out and do exactly what he's doing.
yeah.
I want to be able to put as much work into my work the way that he does in his. That's the stuff that I want to do the most. And I won't get into the technical side of it too much, but of
Yeah.
course I've learned a lot about staging and how to use a camera, how to use your costumes, how to pick something else in the scene to enhance it. All of these kind of things that that you can get even from watching his films. It's all
Yeah.
there. It's all there. It's always been there, and he does it consistently. And I think that's why it's all so beautiful. And now I'm able to recognize it in other films as well. So, but when it comes to us, I think it's you have to, if you try to do anything that's not coming naturally from you, it's gonna look so fake, and people are just gonna see. So that fear is there more than anything. There's I'll give you a small anecdote. I wrote a short film along with a friend of mine called Richard Anthony. It's called
Okay.
Brew, and he
Okay.
directed, put it out on YouTube. It did well. It did well for both of us, and like he directed it, and it was a idea that he had that we both developed. And then there was a third writer, Deepthi Govindraj, as well, who was amazing as well. So at that point, when the movie came out and some people watched it, and some people actually got back to me saying, "Oh, did you write this part?" And I was like, "Yeah, why?" And they're like, "It sounded just like you."
Oh,
And I
wow.
was like, "Wow, that's such a compliment." But
Yeah.
actually, I didn't realize it was a compliment. I first got scared. I was like, "Does that mean that I'm going to start sounding monotonous?" Like that it's people that they're listening to something and they're like, "That's Sana." I'm like, "Oh my god, why do they know that?" It should feel like those people. It should feel like those characters. So if anything, I'm like, I should not come through so strongly and everything.
Yeah.
Feel like it's just sounding one toned. I got more worried about that. Now I've probably put people onto this and they'll only think of this when they watch my stuff. But
Yeah, it's a
then
great Easter egg for those of you who want to go watch this film on YouTube. Go figure what Sana has written and let us know.
yeah, because and then I realized that okay, that's good because at least it's better than being told you're writing like money. So it's
Yeah, yeah.
as in even he's going to look and be like, why are you doing that? And you can't do it as well as him, so let's not try. you know I think you have to be able to write as yourself. And I don't know about I these feel like very heavy questions to me, that what is my voice, what do I want to say, all of that. I was like, I don't know, it'll come on paper, then
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
make,
yeah.
and whatever comes out of it is, then it's up to you guys can feel it, and maybe from what you're interpreting is what I'll finally understand. Half of us, I think, don't know exactly what we want to say, and that's why we start saying it in other mediums to figure it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, yeah, no. No, because it's more like how do you then kind of, I guess, figure to develop your own voice? I mean, of course, for some people, it's just constantly writing, writing, writing till something actually sticks, and it's like, okay, so this is what I sound like, or this is the sort of definitive voice I want to take up for a particular kind of story, or for this kind of writing, or whatever it is. So it's just fascinating to kind of hear different people's processes on this. So it's always an interesting conversation to have, like how people are kind of developing or finding their own voice, so to speak. Because it's happened with me also, where I'll write something and then suddenly I'll go look at it and I'll be like, why do I sound like this writer I have just read like 10 days ago? And it's like a constant subconscious thing.
That
And
happens for sure, yeah. Where I'll go read something and I'll be like, oh, I was watching this or I was reading this earlier and I've been influenced by it, and I have to feed it into a scene and it doesn't have any context. So what I'll do at that point is, okay, I've still written it, so let's take it out and I put it basically in some other folder, and I'll be like, it'll come in handy some other point. So there's no need to discard it. It's just that maybe what you're trying to say at that point is not fitting in there.
there, yeah.
That if you want to do it something in a different style, because we're all definitely derivative of something.
Oh yeah, oh,
Yeah.
100%.
So
Yeah, because again, I was having a conversation again with Pragya Bhagat, who was also a guest on the show. So she's a spoken word artist and she's written like 2 books. So even she was saying she struggles with this, each time she writes, and she's like, yeah. And then she was saying, like, basically, I think we're all just a sort of culmination of everything we're consuming, which is so true also in a sense when you think about it.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Like even I think even, and everything you consume is, it doesn't stop at just whatever art you're pursuing. It's
Oh
definitely,
yeah,
it's everything. Including actually just your life experiences, which are more
oh yeah,
mundane. Everything, right? So
yeah. So yeah, it's really fascinating to, I guess, see the journey of how someone kind of develops their own style, in a sense. But yeah, kind of shifting gears a little bit. Of course, Ponniyin Selvan is the film everyone is talking about right now. I know you're also like really busy now that the second part is right around the corner, in a sense.
20
Uh,
April, guys. Everyone go
yes.
to theaters and watch Ponniyin Selvan 2 on the 28th of April. Sorry for the plug-in.
Yeah, this just became a promo. Madras Talkies is now sponsoring this podcast episode. No, they're not. No, they're not, guys. I'm just joking. But yeah, but if they want to, I'm just saying. I'm just putting this out there. But yeah, uh, but no, so PS1, of course, I mean, did phenomenally well, and obviously PS2, there's a lot of expectation, and everyone's like, oh my god. But what I want to ask is, what goes, because by the end of the day, it is, of course, it's been this really grand spectacle, but it is very much an adaptation of Kalki's work, right? There is already a sort of set of books. It's got a very strong fan base and a loyal fan base, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
then, what goes into making, like, from your experience, what do you think really goes into making an adaptation like this?
Yeah, this was a great experience as a young artist, I would say, to understand, because right now in the world we're doing so many book adaptations.
Yeah.
It's insane. And the Ponniyin Selvan as a series of books is fabulous. It's amazing. I've read it. And then I heard the audio books as well because I wanted to hear it in Tamil, and I unfortunately can't read Tamil. But it's in the language itself, it's amazing, it's brilliant, because the story is so well woven with so many characters. But what the advantage of a book is that you can take even chapters of deviating from a story to just kind of world build and do all these kind of things, or just stick to develop certain characters so beautifully using much more time, which is a luxury that we don't have in film. We have to keep
Hmm.
it kind of cut to cut. And even a series as big as Game of Thrones, I
Yeah.
would have struggled with what they have to keep and what they have to let go of, because even when you have, say, 7 seasons and these many episodes, it'll still feel like less, because your actual episode time and how you have to create a graph within it makes it very complicated. So we definitely felt that challenge as well. And it was something that we all actively thought about a lot. And of course, I mean, everything has happened with money. So, he is the genius behind it for sure. And it was how he managed to see what would work for screen. And I think that's the most important part of book adaptations. You have to be able to see which is the thing that's going to translate on screen dramatically and make for an interesting and fresh visual. That's
Hmm.
what's most important. You obviously have to stick to the story, so you need to be able to get that. And even if you're deviating the story a little bit, you're manipulating a little bit, or I mean, there's enough and more opportunities now. Like, people take books and then spin the end and things like that as well. Or like they'll change the main character into another gender. All sorts of things are happening. But for us, because we were actually trying to stick to the books as much as possible, it just became a filtration process. Because Kalki's work is
Hmm.
so amazing in terms of even creating a screenplay, that I think what he started to do, from my observations, was that he started to pick out the best portions of everybody, like what is interesting for
Hmm.
this character and what is going to enhance the film. Then what are the peak scenes which are going to make for an exciting sequence. In PS1 we have a great rivalry between two female characters,
Yeah.
Nandini and Kundavai, and this
Yeah.
is written in the 50s, where
Yeah.
that track is so interesting even in the books, and I'm glad that people like it even in the movies. But 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 it's but it's not just something that's catty. It's very deeply layered.
Yeah.
I think bringing out that story, concentrating on them, helps the film.
Yeah.
There's so much in the books that that, like I said, it's the filtration process to be able to see. And I don't think that comes easy, for sure. I don't think that if you give me a book now, I'm going to do it to perfection the way that he has. It's of course his skill also, and like years of knowing how to craft a screenplay that's been able to do that for him. We even had Jem Onser with dialogues, who's done so much research, and that's another thing, to do research. And so it's a lot of just work really at the end of it. And I guess then it'll come down to a person's sensibilities, finally what they want to take away from a book, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, which is fair, because it's really interesting that obviously, the whole team, and of course it is Mani Ratnam's vision at the end of the day, but obviously just to adapt in general, book to screen adaptations can be very tricky, because they're either like it's either a hit or a miss in most cases.
Clearly,
Uh,
most of the time.
and the fact that it's really hit the mark, that means like everyone, obviously the readers are very happy with, I think most readers have been very happy with what's come out on screen.
About that also. I think they've also been like very generous in understanding that we have a certain time limit that we have to stick with. But no, I'm very happy it's come out well.
Yeah. No, but it's amazing, and it's like you said, now there's this sudden sort of increase in book to screen adaptations. What is your take on that in general, now that you're seeing more of it happening?
I think it's awesome in terms of in terms of having that content as an option. Like it's good to know that you can openly collaborate, and it's not trying to be a copy or anything like that. It's doing a good collaboration, and that's really interesting, and that's fun, and clearly it's giving way to a lot of like good films in whether it's regional content or even your Hollywood picks or whatever like
Yeah.
that. That I mean, honestly, if you look at the slates that are coming out, most of the time they're filled with book adaptations, right?
Yeah.
Even Marvel films are book
Book
adaptations. They're not
adaptations. Yeah.
book adaptations. That's it. So like we're steeped in that right now. So there's a small concern for original content.
Mm.
I don't think I feel too badly about it. I know that some other people definitely have stronger opinions on this, being like, it's almost like the death of original content, because everyone is like just taking up like books, and then you want to only adapt that, and even production houses want to do that. They're like, oh my god, this is a bestseller, bring people to develop it, get a director, and then make it. So it's feeling like that people who are writing original stories is getting lost, and all of that, and this is coming from our OTT culture, which is of course like half our cinema now. So it's, I guess it's a bit daunting in that sense, but I don't know how much it'll come in the way of actual original storytelling as well, because right now, look, Everything Everywhere All at Once
Yeah.
has done so well. It's an original screenplay, right? I hope I'm not wrong about
It
that.
is.
But
Yeah, yeah, it's an indie film, and so is The Whale.
yeah, and no, and so The Whale is still based on a play, actually.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that. That's
Naren
interesting to know.
Aronofsky watched a play by the same title, and then he decided he wanted to make a movie. And I think only 10 years after that, he ended up actually making it.
Oh,
But
wow. Okay.
so see, like I said, art is derivative, okay, and it's completely
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
nothing wrong with it. And even saying, "Oh my God, but where is the original content?" I'm like, it's there. It's just
Yeah.
you're probably not watching it, but it's definitely there. And maybe in a larger studio sense, it's a bit daunting that they want things like that. And Darren Aronofsky wanting to make The Whale is easy. Like anyone is going to make anything that Darren Aronofsky wants to make. He's got credit
Fair.
on his side. You know what I mean? Yeah, the Everything Everywhere All at Once, that way is more indie filmmakers, but now
Yeah.
they've really
Grown
got
up. Yeah.
recognition. Forget the Oscars, it's gotten people's love, and that's what's most. I went to watch it in a theater in Chennai, and it was a full house on a weekday in the afternoon.
Oh, wow.
In
Okay.
case you're wondering what I was doing there on a weekday in the afternoon, I make films. Okay, I'm allowed to go.
It's a part of your job. See, this is why people think your job is easy. You're going to a theater on the weekday.
No, I did go with a couple of colleagues, but it was also because we were like, no, we need to see it. It's such a good film. And for whatever reason, it was only running in the afternoon. And we were like, please, just during lunch, we'll go watch it and come back. It was totally worth it. Amazing.
Yeah. No, but that's really cool, because yeah, it has been a sort of, I think today, I don't know, just the whole book to screen phenomenon is suddenly like blowing up. Suddenly you see so many more people just buying book rights and stuff like that, to adapt to, to what, which is great, which I mean, I work in publishing, so from a publishing standpoint it's great for us, because it's more opportunity for our stories to really reach different audiences through different mediums. But it's interesting because you also have films being made into books as well. which is a very, it's happening vice versa as well, because there was, if I talk about, say, so I work with Tulika Books. So there was this film called Unga by Devashish Makhija,
Right.
and he used to assist Anurag Kashyap. So we adapted that film into a book for like young adult readers. So it's really fascinating to see this sort of vice versa thing also happening. So I think it's a interesting sort of collaboration or exchange in a way.
100%. All art is good art.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just, I think as long as stories can reach different people in different ways, then I think it's win-win for everyone, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It also is this book adaptation thing is also making like books make a more healthy comeback now. I feel like in the middle it was we not that people weren't reading or anything like that. Now anyway, it's there's the digital mode of reading and all of
The
that.
audiobooks, yeah. So yeah, I mean, kind of just to pivot then, obviously, I mean, book to screen, but then, like, what is your take on remakes?
Ooh.
That's a loaded question, which is why I'm asking it. If you can answer.
I don't know. I mean, now also, I think because you're just asking, I'm going blank on what has even been recently remade. I think, okay, fine, each to their own, really. Like, I mean, it's the same as taking Shakespeare and doing it over and over and over again, right?
Yeah.
I don't even think people see it as remakes of each other. They're only seeing it from the source material or whatever. And so there are obviously good remakes and bad remakes, but that's just again a case of good filmmaking and bad filmmaking, right? Like I mean, whatever. That's again an opinion. Like it's very based on what you can like. Some things are very obvious to all people that it's just not working, but that's like a bad day of filmmaking, really. But
Yeah.
overall I think it has its place. If someone is tempted to make something and reimagine it the way that they want to, I think they should have all the space to do it, and it's of course up to you if you want to go watch it or not.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really a personal preference thing. I'm trying to think of like there have been so many remakes of Devdas. Like
Yeah, that
you
is true.
have the original and then you have Sanjay Leela Bhansali's Devdas, and as a story it's very Shakespearean in its nature and all of that. But I mean, I loved Sanjay Leela
Yeah.
Bhansali's Devdas. I
Same,
didn't see the
same.
original, but I love this one, and it completely works for me. I'm trying to think of other remakes which probably I've liked, and I'm just not able to like Little Women, like you said.
Yeah.
Again, the source material definitely is from a book. I don't know if it falls into a
But it's, I think there are like three movies
yeah,
at this point.
exactly, right? So, like, I'm sure some genius is thinking that, oh, they remade the other movie.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, I'm trying to think which movie has been remade into another movie. I'm not able to like come up with more names, but I just think that there's a space for it. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Oh, yeah, for
it's a
sure.
it's a it's a total personal opinion if you want to watch it or not. And then, like any other film, I hope you're able to make it well. That's about it.
Yeah, for sure. No, because it's like you said, there are good remakes and there are remakes which just somehow just don't work at all, because it really doesn't stick to the original somehow, no matter how you look at it. But yeah, again, because we were talking about original content and storytelling, because remakes is also now like another thing that's also being done a lot more of now. So again, I think when it comes to original stories, it I guess it becomes a bit of a challenge again to put out original content.
It's
Uh,
definitely from wanting to be able to monetize, right? There's some guarantee in knowing that people are going to come and watch this because there's an intrigue about how is it going to be this time or because it's done well before and all of that. And frankly, we need films to do well, even for smaller films to be made. So I guess everything just, you have to look at it in a business sense and be like, it is going to happen. How much ever you throw a hissy fit and say that this is what you
yeah.
want and we need more of these kind of films, like more original stories or more dramatic stories, more like serious cinema, all of that. Whatever we do, in the end there is an entire world who wants a certain kind of cinema as well, and all of it has its place, really.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So yeah, I mean, now we're coming towards the end of this interview, and we always end with these last two questions. So first one is like, what are your aspirations? This can be professional, personal, creative, just things you're looking forward to in the near or even distant future.
I think an aspiration, other than the obvious one of just make films always, I think is definitely that now, because the world has opened up because of OTT, something that we make here can be watched anywhere. I I have a craving for a larger audience now. That not
Hmm.
I as in I want to be able to, not that that many people should watch it, but that it should be accessible to these many people, and that it should work on a more it should, it should stand the test of time. That is one, that I make something that is relevant 20 years later, that you can watch it and it would feel important. That was anyway always there, but I think now it's that I can make something in Chennai about
Yeah.
people in Chennai, but it's going to be relatable to someone in New York, someone in China, like, that now, because it is officially open to everyone,
Yeah.
it is something that's relatable and not so contextually specific, that at least that's something that I'm like working towards now, that I would want that. And I generally have a space for travel in my heart, so I want to be able to take my films and travel. Like shooting
Nice.
with them is definitely one thing, like shooting them in different places, of course, like we all
Yeah.
do that just for the visual look of the film, and what you can get texturally for it, like in terms of the culture and things like that. But I also mean in terms of film festivals has anyway been there for donkey's years, but
Yeah.
I think I've opened up to it more now. Like I do want to travel with my film and be able to kind of interact with other audiences with it, and I think it'll help me learn more. So that's definitely an aspiration that's come up.
Yeah. And of course, there is PS2, which is the even more obvious one, which is right around the corner, as we said. Uh,
I hope it
yeah.
receives as much love.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I mean, I think you guys will be fine. But yeah, last question. What is a piece of advice or learning that you'd like to share? This can again be personal, professional, something that basically you've experienced in life and you just wish more people were aware of.
More aware of, I think actually this is the oldest lesson in the world, but I think maybe more specifically to whether it's either directing or writing, is that it's like playing an instrument. You've got to practice. It's not gonna happen otherwise. You're not it's an muscle you have to exercise all the time. So even if it's really little that you're writing, or it's very little that you're shooting and putting together as a thought, it's good to do it as consistently as possible, so that it's not about making good stuff all the time. It's just about being able to constantly write so that you can develop more. It's only going to improve. And I know that's there whether you're a sports person, or like I said, a musician. You already have that culture of needing to practice, and that's a given for them. But I think it's as important for creative people, that even if you're thinking that you're having a writing block and things, sometimes the way through that is to keep writing, even if it's writing rubbish.
Yeah.
Like of course you can do other things to stimulate yourself, but saying that no, I need to take a break and just step aside, this, that, I'm not saying there's anything wrong in taking a break, but I think long extended breaks because you're worried about getting in, I face that. I tend to procrastinate things out of the fear of not writing something good. But I think I've learned now that it's not important to be good all the time. You just, your final output has to be good, so everything in between doesn't matter, you have to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that wonderful note, we've now come to the end of this interview. Thank you so much for being here, Sana. It was absolutely wonderful talking to you.
It was great chatting with you. It's been a wonderful chat for me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And
Bye.
so that was my conversation with Sana Mariam. I really enjoyed talking to her about visual storytelling, movies, and listening to her perspective on adaptations and remakes. Closing this episode with a script written and narrated by Sana. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll see you next week with a new guest and a new chronicle to share. Talk soon!
Today I'm going to read the first story I ever wrote in script format, quite a few years ago in college, a short film. Exterior apartment lobby day. A taxi drives away to reveal a petite girl with large suitcases. Character Sarah, VO, voiceover. When I took the internship, I didn't imagine the living in another city part to be the hardship. and I definitely didn't think into the fact that I'd be living alone with a boy. She struggles to pull her suitcases up a series of staircases. She stops for breath, pulls up her sleeves, and tries again harder. Sarah. Not being able to pull my own weight, speaking quite literally, was not the biggest problem. Interior apartment day. She rings the doorbell and is warmly greeted by her soon to be housemate Ayan with a bear hug, and he pulls her luggage in with less than half the trouble she was having. Sarah Vio. Spoiler alert, we are at no point falling in love. This isn't that kind of story. If anything, the story proves that a girl and a guy can share the same space day in, day out, and stay friends. She follows him into the apartment as he rambles on, looking distractedly at her new home. Sarah Vio. Although I will say this, the opposite gender is called so for more than just the physical reasons. Interior living room day. Sarah is sitting on the sofa reading a book. Sarah Vio. For one thing, guys can do some things girls just can't. Ayan walks into the room wearing nothing but a towel and saunters into the kitchen, while Sarah eyes him and looks away immediately, feeling awkward. He plonks himself onto the sofa next to her with a carton of juice. The girl stares at him until he shrugs, not understanding why she's uncomfortable. Ayan. What's wrong? Sarah. Aren't you forgetting something? He looks down and sighs. He gets up and walks away, and the girl is visibly glad that he's decided to put some clothes on, but is soon disappointed when he returns with the juice in a glass, completely misunderstanding the assignment. He smiles broadly and she simply fakes one and turns back to her book. Cut to interior kitchen day. Sarah stands opposite the stove as if she is in a face-off. VO. And sometimes girls can't do things guys think they can do. Sarah places a pan on the stove, turns the knob for the gas nervously and tries lighting the stove, but it just won't work. She tries again and again, afraid of the stove, the entire time, but it just won't work. The guy notices and frowns at her. He walks in, does it in one swift move and whacks her on the head on the way out. She yells at him at first but slowly smiles to herself after. Interior bedroom night. A room with a dim nightlight shows Sarah tucked in bed, asleep. VO. There will be points when the guy can just get on your last nerve. She's woken up by loud snores all the way from the other room. She beats around her bed restlessly and pulls the sheets over her head, trying to block the noises out. Interior bedroom day. The girl dances around her room to loud upbeat music as she's cleaning. Sarah, VO. But there will also be points when you get on his last nerve. Her room door flies open. Ayan is in boxer shorts and a worn-out t-shirt, hair messy from just being out of bed, eyes hardly open, with an eye patch over his forehead. He looks at her extremely annoyed. Ayan, what are you doing? She looks at him confused and points at the sunshine streaming in from the windows. Sarah, it's 1 PM. Ayan, exactly. He exclaims and returns to his room as the girl turns the music down, banging both doors on the way. She continues dancing to the slightly lower music and laughs at her roommate. Cut to interior kitchen day. Sarah and Ayan stand side by side in front of the kitchen sink, passing each other plates to be washed and dried. The VO. All the differences kept aside though, no one could have ever made doing the dishes more fun than him. He splashes water onto her and she hits him with the towel. Interior bedroom night. Sarah and Ayan are sitting up against the headboard of the bed but are fast asleep. She rests her laptop on her lap. VO. No one would have kept me awake to finish my work no matter how sleepy he was. Ayan wakes up from his sleep and nudges Sarah, who is leaning on his shoulder. She wakes up and starts typing into her laptop as he hands her coffee. He slowly begins to drift off to sleep when she hands him the cup. He wakes up and takes a sip himself to stay awake. Interior entrance corridor of house. Night. Sarah opens the door and walks into the house, her laptop still in her hand, her juggling everything, and Ayan runs out of his room. VO. No one would have taught me to take my life less seriously and just make the most of each moment. He grabs her bag, throws it onto the couch and drags her out the house right after, even while she complains the entire time. Cut to exterior poolside night. They are dangling their feet in a pool and drinking beers, laughing loudly between conversations. Interior entrance corridor of house night. House door opens to reveal Ayan's arm draped mercilessly over Sarah's petite shoulders. VO. Don't worry, I helped him out once in a while too. She pulls his drunk demeanor into the house with a lot of struggle. Interior bedroom day. VO. Living with a boy may be hard, but I think we made living better. Ayan peeps into the room. He asks, "You ready to go? We're going to be late." And she says, "Yep, I'm just going to be there in a minute." She looks back into her room to make sure she's got everything, and she puts her work off. And you see that her desktop wallpaper is a picture of the two of them. Fade to black.